The Florida Horse Podcast is presented by the Florida Thoroughbred Breeders and Owners Association.
Welcome to the Florida Horse Podcast, brought to you by the Florida Thoroughbred Breeders and Owners Association. I'm Tammy, Gantt, and I'm joined today by our CEO, Lonny Powell. So let's get started. It's good to have you in the studio today, Lonny.
It's always great to be in the FTBOA offices, Tammy, and in our wonderful studio. And I can't think of a better option for today.
It's been a long time. I think we did the first podcast and kicked it off more than a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years now, July. So it's hard to believe 2 years later, here we are.
It is hard to believe, and we sure are thrilled with how the podcast has worked out as another media platform for us. We've been able to inform the members. We've been able to update our industry on important developments. And mostly, I think we've been able to reach out and touch more people than ever before. So a great job to Steve and yourself and Brock, and I'm just glad to be a part of it. And I love doing this. So let's go ahead and have a conversation.
I think one of the things when you say conversation that we found that people really love is to hear people's backstories,
right? Where
you came from, how you got involved in the industry. And I think very few people that are our listeners, maybe some of our board members, are people that you know really, really well in the industry for your 40 plus years. Mm-hmm. I'll say that.
Boy,
because you started when you were a very young child.
Yes, very
so take us back to that those first moments of industry.
I think you get into the thoroughbred or quarter horse or horse business, no matter who you are, there's a couple different paths you get in. One is you end up, as you're growing up, you end up being an animal lover or horse lover, or you get that first horse, right? You get that first pony. I think so many of us can relate to that. Another way is you end up later on as an adult getting exposed to some type of equine event or discipline or performance. And then you come to racing, at least my experience at the University of Arizona or with the University of Louisville students or a lot of those folks, or in England, Australia, America, oftentimes they were interested as a punter, as a player. Mm-hmm. The gambling was what attracted them, and then they wanted to learn more about how the business worked and make a career in the business. For me, I came that different traditional route. My father was a jockey, and so, from the time I was born, I was part of the industry, too young to know it. It just seemed like what the normal world was. But so I got to see it from that end, where I thought it was kind of like normal to live my world, and it was kind of abnormal for those that didn't have, dads that wore real shiny pajamas, I called them, for the silks, and I got to keep the goggles, his jockey goggles, and play Batman on the playground and be cool and stuff like that. And so, I got to know it that way. When you're a jockey's kid, it's kind of like maybe being a professional coach's kid. First of all, you know you're going to be mobile a bit, and though so much of the childhood was based on almost like he had a regular job, because we lived in Los Angeles, and Santa Anita and Hollywood Park and Los Alamitos were the main places he rode. So theoretically, he'd drive early in the morning to, go train on the track, and then he'd come back from either night racing or day racing program. But the big deal was in the summertime, it was called Del Mar. And in Del Mar, all of us little racetrack brats like myself and our mothers basically traveled with their trainer or jockey husbands, fathers, and we all lived on the beach. There was a trailer park on the beach at Del Mar. So that was always, Del Mar very seldom hung out at the racetrack as a kid, but all over the beach. And so you kind of, grew up in that environment. And there was also a huge emphasis on speed at all times, because jockeys like speed. And so my dad never did anything too slow. And so I don't care. And I was a pretty conservative kid. I got scared pretty easy. And to go on a motorcycle ride with him, or a snowmobile ride, or a boat ride, or a car ride was just like taking your life in your own hands. It was a Hollywood experience, a movie moment every time. And he was tough too. And when it comes to that, because he was a cowboy first, his people came from Missouri.
Thank you, Missourian.
Yes,
right here, Missourian.
Where the draft horse Percherons were were king. In fact, my great-grandfather who farmed the Percherons in Missouri, he died from being kicked by his own Percheron, and there was not a hospital within hours of the place. And, they moved west. That family moved west, my dad's side. They got into quarter horses and then the cowboy thing. I remember right towards the end of his jockey career, I was riding one of my ponies, and we lived in a neighborhood that was by the LA forest. And so once or twice a month, we'd all go trail riding with the neighbors and everything. And I was on my one pony, and ran off on me, rolled on me in a wash. I got scared. I hung on, ran off on me, threw me down, ran over my back. And, you would have thought I had died. I felt like I died as a kid. It was the most.
And your dad's mental toughness was, come on, just get up and get back on that pony.
Dad, it really literally was. I mean, my dad's thing was, and I was crying and it hurt. And I remember him in front of all those people, a little embarrassed because they were kids my age and younger, but a lot of adults. I remember him saying, if you fall off a horse, you get thrown off a horse, no matter how much it hurts, you always get yourself back up and get back on.
Yeah, that's having grown up in Missouri, I get that, because that is just like a Missouri toughness, and you've got that Missouri show me state in you.
Yeah.
So it's like you have to get back on that horse to prove that toughness and then to overcome that moment.
His expectation was you would always just be tough, and the thing is, we took horses so casually because they were such an important part of our life. And back in the time, it was a much freer way of thinking for parents. They let their kids spend days or whatever, and literally with just a saddle pad with a little handle on it and no stirrups, the next thing above bareback riding, I'd get on one of our horses, and my cousin or somebody else would, and we'd literally go ride, 4 or 6 hours for the day before coming back home. And that's as little kids, So
at what point did your dad, you realize that he was a big deal? Because he has a jockey card.
Right.
And when you showed me that jockey card, I knew he was a jockey, but it took me to another level because I've come from outside the industry, first generation in the biz.
Right.
So what did that mean to you when you realized that's a pretty big deal?
Yeah, I think it really hit me the first time. Towards the end of his career, we hit the road from California. My mom and he and I, and maybe one or two of my sisters was born. They would have been very little, and did the Illinois, Florida circuit. So we did Arlington, Washington National, Sportsman up in Chicago, and then did Arlington, but did Hialeah and Tropical Park.
You were a thoroughbred at one time, I heard.
Yeah. And what was wild even is I never knew I'd be back to Florida in this capacity, right? But I'm actually a proud first grade graduate of Hialeah Presbyterian. I was not Presbyterian, but they took a racing kid that arrived halfway through the school year that had a lot of cool jockey goggles they thought made him be Batman. But I think when I really found out he was a big deal is when he retired. He retired in the late 60s, and this word was, wow, he was going right from the saddle to a Jockeys Guild management job. And that was, jockeys, they struggle oftentimes with what their next career step is, like a lot of pro athletes, once you stop. And so that put him in a management level, but dealing with the same thing, but basically representing jockeys like a union person would. And he had everything west of the Mississippi at the time, plus Canada and Mexico. We started out in California in that position. The California earthquake of 70 happened, destroyed our house. My dad's boss at the time said, "You can live any place you want if you want to get out of California, as long as there's an airport." Moved to Idaho because he liked to hunt and fish. I had to have picked up on some of those skills because here was a guy that wasn't even he just went to 7th grade before he started riding at 14. He took off and rode in Mexico. Here he's operating a typewriter. He's having to do math. And I'm telling you, it didn't come to him naturally. He had to self-teach himself. But to him, I guess it was probably like falling off, and you better get back on.
Yeah. I think that's the grit that you have, because everything you approach with passion because you're in the industry, from the industry, and then you approach it with a lot of grit. And I think you've used the word before, scrappy. Yeah. And I think people are a little surprised when they meet someone in management and you have those traits that you use at every point in time when you attack things.
Yeah, boy, scrappy. I've heard that applied to me a lot. Particularly
is that good? Is that
in Florida? I like it. Yeah, I mean, I would much rather be scrappy than the passive, quiet one. I think it passes off. I hear my daughter Sarah referred to as scrappy quite a bit around, and I think my dad definitely was a scrappy one. Even when later on in his years, when I was management at racetracks, and sometimes would have to do business with him, he'd come in, and he'd just be come in looking for a fight of some kind. If it was the fact that you hadn't given him a coat with your racetrack logo on it for years, he'd come in wearing a competing racetrack's logo and want to get you irritated, even on things like that. So, but I may have very well picked up certainly on some of those things. The phone rang all the time. It was always jockeys needing help. It was always going to stewards' hearings. I was always hearing about attorney generals. I knew what stewards were. I knew what jockeys' agents were. But what's funny is, and this is really true, all the way up till I was 19 years old, there were zero plans to make a career out of this business. This business was going to be one that put food on my table as a kid. It was one that I worked in the lower level jobs in high school and college. So it put me through school, but I had no plans to make a career out of it. A lot of that was at the urging of my mom, who saw my dad get hurt as a jockey, and I made it up on my own.
So when you said 19, you said, I wasn't really thinking about going in this biz. It had been good to you, good to your family.
Right.
And then I know FFA happened around that time. So was it the leadership through FFA and all, because you were doing speaking engagements and that type of thing? Is that what launched you, where you said, well, maybe there's a different path for me here?
Well, it's funny, because I'm glad, you're a future farmer of America. We all tell lots of stories how that impacted us, even in our adult lives. I knew I wanted to do something that would be important. Quite honestly, I thought I would be a professional politician, and I did believe that was important when I was in high school. And FFA had a lot to do with that in terms of speaking, parliamentary procedure. The first class that, to my knowledge, in high school that I had for a couple of years, where you actually had to stand up on your feet multiple times, as during the class, and give oral presentation speeches, all those things. So that made me want to be and evolve into a leader at that age. I was 14 in Idaho. And, there's not many jobs you can get at 14, but you could get agricultural farm worker jobs and be paid cash. And so I had found out from some neighborhood friends that we could go top corn, which is removing the tassels off the male corn rows. Yeah. And in the summers in Idaho, where it would be in the
brutal
mid to high 90s,
which seems really cool today.
In the sun. I remember getting paid 50 cents an hour. We worked ungodly hours. And so I remember my dad asking me at the end of the day, after I did it all summer, what I had to show for it. And I remember I got an 8-track player. They had like a pump handle on them where you could advance one track at a time. I had my first 8-track, so I had some rock and roll music, and I really didn't have anything else to show for it. And I remember him saying, okay, you can't do better than that. You're going to work at the racetrack, meaning LeBois Park, the next year. And I just had a fit. And so sure enough, I get told to go in and get licensed. And I started out at this small track in Boise. For the first year and a half, I did nothing but clean bathrooms. Clean the toilets, clean the public showers, clean the jockey's locker room, which was nightmarish, clean their showers, and then mow all the lawns associated with the racetrack. And it didn't make me want to work in racing.
Because you were doing that ground up, but what a great education, because you're living vicariously, seeing what your father's doing in his office that relates to the industry. You're seeing from the ground up what it means to be an employee at a racetrack at every level.
And making friends. Even some of my own friends from the corn topping days ended up on the maintenance crew. My dad helped them get jobs. He had influence. He didn't, obviously wasn't management over there. And I ended up, by chance, just rubbing a lot of elbows with jockey people and trainer people and all that, as we'd be cleaning out the barn area. We're ready for the horses to arrive, so
was the next natural progression
was the starting gate.
The starting gate, right?
Starting gate, and then as an assistant starter, which to me was at Rush, and there's only Any given racetrack, especially a small racetrack, may have 5 or 6 of those. There's 300 people that want the job. For what it was high paying, still at poverty level, but high paying. There was tip money involved sometimes. There was danger involved. So if you were into sports or athletics, you kind of felt that thrill still.
And you still have all your fingers after it.
You
So
still
that's
have
something to say.
Yeah, fingers. We had a couple of guys missing a different ear before things were all over, but that's a whole other story. But it was a hard scrabble life. The other gate crew members were typically non-college folks that were much older, and people like myself, Brock, who works here and runs Florida Equine Communications. He worked on some of those same gate crews. We also were valets where we saddled horses and weighed the jockeys. Made you really rough and tough, and plugged you right in, and you were almost your own mini celebrity, especially on the gate crew. Like I always said, the jockeys always did first, and if it was a Friday night, in having their dates lined up, and the assistant starters, we might get that next round, And it made a lot of good friends, and I did that for 6 or 7 years, and it was during that time that I said, you know what? Rather than going to law school and this political science, maybe I could be a lawyer for like a racing commission or maybe a racetrack. And of all things, one of the assistant starters in Boise, I was having this conversation while sitting on the pontoon of the starting gate, waiting for the horses to come so we could load them, said, you know what? There's a University of Arizona down in Tucson where we all go in the winter. They've got a racetrack industry program. In fact, your dad has been a guest lecturer. Why hadn't you thought of that? And I got my mind fixated on it, decided that's what I wanted to do. And then I knew, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to tell my parents, because I was already into college 2 years at the University of Idaho. I was in pre-law. And so I remember telling my dad first. And you could tell he was proud and excited, but he was in shock. And he really wanted to know if that's for sure what I wanted to do. And I didn't even know what I wanted. I remember him telling me, what do I want to do in racing? And I said, well, I'd like to be the assistant racing secretary. And he said, well, why is that? I said, because they get listed in the program, but because they're assistant, they mustn't have to take all the heat. It's hard to believe that's the same me. I made the decision. I remember him telling me, your mom's going to get so mad at me, meaning dad. She's going
to think that he somehow convinced you.
And I go, I'll make sure, I'm going to take the spear. I remember going upstairs to see mom, and she immediately just started cussing about my father as soon as I talked to her. And, I kept telling her it was my own decision. They both ended up being obviously very proud down the ways. And my dad got so out of hand on the whole thing. I hear neighbors and other people in Boise would call me wherever I was at Santa Anita, wherever else, and go, wow, that was a nice article on you. I go, your dad's driving around Boise with blood horse copies of an article with you in it and just handing it out to neighbors and people. That's when I had made the decision.
You've arrived when you start appearing in the Blood Horse and the trade press. You say, I must be either upsetting a lot of people because I'm doing some really major management changes, or the opposite, where people go, hey, there's something here. I want to follow this guy, and he's inspiring because he's ahead of the curve for the rest of the industry.
Well, it was pretty cool. I think that even though I grew up my first 11 years primarily in California, my junior high and high school years were Idaho. And so that small town atmosphere, and the coaches and the community and the farmers and everything, they're really proud of their own. And so they really cheered on my career when I got out. And even when I got out, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have a year-round job. I was one of the only people that had a free pass my senior year. Now, I studied an awful lot. It was important to me. But I also had a lot of fun. And boy, it was a year you could do a lot of both with no pressure, because I knew where my job was. But when I remember, I think it was my dad that asked me, well, what am I going to get paid? I had no idea, because I'd never even asked. So I had no idea until I got my first paycheck with my first job, because to me, that wasn't important. The important thing was to get on to some respectable racetrack team and to map out what your plan was, how you're going to keep yourself able to pay the bills and surviving on a year-round basis.
And what track
right?
was that?
It was Long Acres in Seattle, and
so you had a job before you got out of a racetrack industry program at University of Arizona.
I interned there. It was an incredible internship, because my only exposure at the time was, in addition to, growing up in the business, but was, working the starting gates and as jockey valet. It was not a coat and tie part of the business. So the intern thing, you got to wear a coat and tie. Remember, I went and got a denim coat. Well, they didn't allow denim in their turf clubs. So,
and you had to have that because as an intern, you're treated as management.
Oh, yeah.
That's one thing that's impressive about the University of Arizona. It's not like when you say, oh, you're an intern and you're doing whatever shuffle in an office. You're expected to do management type things, and you're treated as another manager.
You learn there's things, all of a sudden, the importance of things called trust, accountability, and all those things. Plus, the Alhada family that owned the racetrack that oversaw my internship, they did a lot of right things. When I first got there, I kind of hid out in the jocks room or went up to the starting gate. And after a couple of days, they asked me why I was doing that. I got my coat on and everything. I said, I just feel comfortable. They said, okay, time for you to get uncomfortable. And I remember I was asked, okay, what areas of the racetrack do you not want to work during your internship? And I took that as a sincere question. And I said, well, I certainly don't want to work food and beverage, or I don't want to work the parimutuel department. Oh, well, why is that? Now, the one brother that's asked me this, he's president of the food and beverage company. And I said, well, I think food and beverage people really don't understand what's going on, and I think they're kind of lazy, and they just get a lot of tips.
And the next place
with parimutuels, I'm the parimutuels, and I go, and the mutuals, they're more interested in betting. I'm all about the horses. The people over in that grandstand, I just can't relate to them much. And I said, I would like to do marketing and racing and all those things. And he goes, well, that's all really good. So he goes, that's great. So starting tomorrow, you'll be in food and beverage. And he goes, not only be in food and beverage, he goes, our maitre d' is going to be gone in a week. So you're going to train to be a maitre d', you're going to train to wear tux, and you're going to seat people in the turf club. And to me, this was just like, you might as well tell me I'm going to go be in Siberia. I mean, it was so depressing, the whole thought to me of having to do something like this. So I go and I train up there, and I'm so not a turf club person. But I noticed the maitre d', as he's training me, whenever important people would come and he'd all of a sudden have a table for them, he'd walk with his hand behind his back. And then I'd all of a sudden see them stuffing green things in his hand, right?
That's another cash position at the racetrack.
Exactly. Now, I was getting paid $22 a day as an intern. And I recall that weekend, I only did it for a weekend, subbing as the maitre d'. And I made more money in those 2 days than I did the entire internship. And I learned something about customer service and also VIPs. Yeah. Likewise, when I went to mutuals, I learned, oh man, there's a lot of pressure back here. If their drawers got a balance at the end of the day, that comes out of their paycheck. Yeah. And from there, it just caught on so well. And I had spent time with the brother of the father, but not the lead brother. He had me for the last 2 days of the internship, and it was there, my last day, he said, we want you to come back. Now, it wasn't this for a year-round job. This would have been a 6 or 7 month job. Yeah. You've got to graduate early, a month or so early. I said, I'd be no problem. I'll be able to do that. And I got the bug, and from there, it all just continued on. Washington ended up being a big state in my history because in addition to that internship, I worked there twice. I'd worked there for the family, and that was just absolutely one of the greatest tracks next to Saratoga and Hialeah in terms of beauty, in terms of success. Because
you were there leading it during its most successful period.
Yeah, I mean, I was there for the good old days with the family, and then they sold to Boeing, and I was already working for R.D. Hubbard at the time, and to my knowledge, I was actually traded like an athlete, but temporarily. It was a temporary trade. I think I was the first executive ever that I was working for him, and we were opening a track in Kansas, who the breeders, Washington Thoroughbred Breeders and the Washington HPPA, the horsemen, formed a nonprofit called the Emerald Racing Association. And they called me and wanted to know if I would run it. And, they needed the track equipment from the Alhada family to make it go. They needed Boeing, the new owner of the property that was going to put their corporate headquarters there. They needed somebody to be the Boeing interface, etc. And my boss, R.D. Hubbard, loaned me to them on a year-to-year basis with the understanding that anytime I wanted out or he wanted me out, we were out, and I had a guaranteed place to go, which let me go there, because who else takes a job that has 1 year to it, right? Parlayed it into 2 years, and those were the two most successful years from a handle attendance perspective. A lot of fun, and it let the old place go out in the glory it deserves. So would truly go down as one of the highlights. I could write a book on working with Boeing. That was a nightmare, but the rest of it all was just pretty darn exciting. And then from there, like I said, I was with Mr. Hubbard, worked for him for 10 years.
Which he is a legend for those that were in racetrack management, growing up, as far as all the types of tracks he was involved in and deals that were made. And you were right there.
He was the really first big visionary, wasn't he, in the business? And, came out of, again, loved horses, but came out of the glass business, self-made million, if not billionaire. Wanted to buy Hollywood Park, got it in a hostile takeover. I was with him at the time. Went on a track shopping spree, let me run these things and turn them around, and it was a splendid period of time, and it was from there that we were trying to sell 2 tracks to this guy whose last name I couldn't pronounce. His name was Frank Stronach. My boss introduces me to Frank Stronach. We're buying casinos, my company at the time. We bought Boomtown. We bought Casino Magics. We had some profitable racetracks. We just lost our bid for Santa Anita, and so we were going to make a pivot towards casinos. I met with Frank, and instead of wanting to buy our racetracks, which he rejected, he said he was going to hire me, and I let him know I wasn't part of that deal. But as you can see, eventually, we didn't sell the tracks. But I ended up with Frank, and that's when the Santa Anita was the first track, and we went and acquired, during my time, 6 more racetracks.
And that's actually where I met you. I don't know if you remember. I was walking out the door of Santa Anita when you were walking in.
I didn't remember this, no.
And it was a brief, like, oh, you were the head of the racetrack industry program. I went there, and you were catching a cab to go fly somewhere.
Always.
And it was the briefest moment. And I can't even remember why I was at Santa Anita, because I was supposed to be at Hollywood Park.
Right.
So I think I went over just to see Santa Anita, maybe.
Yeah.
And there you were, and I was like, oh. And so it hit me in my mind's eye, and I went back in time. It's like, oh, that's where I first met you.
That's fascinating. And as things would have it, I guarantee you I was hitting a cab or some type of a ride someplace. That time was so magical, even rolling out the new stock for Magna Entertainment at the time, being involved in the acquisition of those racetracks, planting our flag. It wasn't easy. It was an awful lot for one guy. I mean, I had one track. I was president CEO of Santa Anita, and then 6 other tracks. I was overseeing the presidents of those racetracks as well. But I
always thought that was what I call the monopoly period of horse racing, right?
Where Santa Anita and Churchill
Group is purchasing, and Park Place boardwalks. You got Santa Anita, Hollywood. Yeah. You've got Gulfstream Park, Calder. You see this, and at the time, I was coming into the scene on the Churchill side, right? But it looked like a monopoly game.
Yeah,
and everyone's like, who's getting Park Place and who's getting boardwalk? Not only that, but what are you going to do with it? So
it was an
interesting time for
especially
sure.
simulcasting was now starting to evolve.
The advent of simulcasting.
ADW. And, what did all this mean? It meant more than brick and mortars. There was a lot of strategy. We in Churchill ended up basically bidding against each other on almost every property, and it seemed like we would spend more, which probably was not surprising. Not always the right way to get it, but got us the prime, got us a Gulfstream over a Calder, got us a Santa Anita versus Churchill, getting Hollywood. We were getting the A properties, and the addition of Bay Meadows and Golden Gate during my time were big. But we also had some tracks that were a bit of a problem because of just the political nature of their states, but they've since gone on involved in the casinos, Remington Park and Thistledown. But it was a whole exciting time. And like you said, the industry nationally was both excited and scared.
Yeah, you didn't know what that simulcasting was going to mean. And the thing with simulcasting was it really began to share all the tracks with the masses in such a way that hadn't been done before. Right. And so it kind of opened doors, but you're right. There was always like, what might happen? What's the other side of that?
We're seeing some of it now. I mean, some of the things that were said back then, I mean, whether it be some racing jurisdictions would be too dependent on slot machines, or a radical increase in the pricing of the product would make the margins too thin for some racetracks or some horsemen's groups. At the same time, there were so few people willing to invest nice dollars that this would probably represent the greatest possibility for investments with both Churchill and Magna Ventures at the time, Magna Entertainment, now
or
the Stronach
CDSN,
Group.
because they were trying to also show that product in the best way that they could.
Exactly.
And look at betting in a different way. So
Yeah.
the punters or the folks that were placing bets, they had that opportunity to get a better product, the way it was presented to them, the types of bets. So there was expansion there. But the question was, well, are they going to increase takeout?
Right.
Or how's that going to, where's the racing purist and all of this?
I remember we did a panel at the symposium that year, my first year, and it was myself and Churchill and the Philadelphia Park guys who were also acquiring some places. And the industry was they were just scared to death, the audience, more about pricing and what we were going to do on content, because, it's so much more than bricks and mortar. From those years, I had a lot of connections, a lot of real great supporters and friends from all these years in the business. And then from the Stronach Group, it just all rolled. And then going on to Kentucky with Racing Commissioners International. From there, got recruited by UBET. Hostile takeover at UBET was kind of an inconvenient moment to set up my own management company. I actually did pretty good with that. And then the governor of Arizona comes calling, get to work in her administration, which was really cool for a guy that was loving politics. And now the blue got called by some headhunter that I thought wasn't for real about something about FTBOA.
The Florida Thoroughbred Breeders and Owners Association brings you back to Florida.
I didn't even return his calls the first couple of times. My secretary and hearing officer kept insisting that I do, and it worked out really well. And this causes you to get very reflective. And I was trying to think about, where did I end up devoting most of my time through all this as an adult? If you don't count the 5 years I was in doing the real tough stuff, the toilet scrubbing, the glass mowing, or even the more fun stuff, assistant starter, jockey, valet, that was a period of time from like 76 to 81. But otherwise, 18 years, I figure it looks like I've been I've got 49 years as an executive. That doesn't count my menial jobs.
I think that someone pointed out to me, and when you won your award at American Horse Council, this did come out, that you never moved to be an executive. You were an executive from the moment that you were not even done with college yet, a year before. I think that fast track, and I think it's hard for people to get the idea of how can he have 49 years of experience? He can't be that old, and you're not, but you started so young, but you were very fortunate that you fast tracked. And so now we're here, FTBOA 13 years. 13 years and in present day. And I
know that fast track, and that's a good observation, because if it wasn't that for that family that owned Longacres, they all had a family. They were the ones that decided to make me a management team member right out of college, but not just a management team member. I only had really 3 people above me, the 3 people that owned the racetrack, and I was on all the inside, and I was the first outsider really brought in. And so you are right, because typically I would have gone and done that assistant racing secretary stuff. I would have earned those stripes, but I got thrown into the big job. And at first I was not qualified, but I also knew what I needed to learn. Right. But they did smart. I didn't have a desk the whole first year. I said, well, you can always use my desk. This is one of the owners, or otherwise we want you on your feet amongst the people and the horsemen. I remember the first time I walked the Santa Ana barn area, I had a number of horses asking if there was a problem or something was wrong. Oh no, this is how I get my juice. I got to walk the track. I got to walk the barn area.
Because you're observing it, you're seeing it, you're living it, you're in the moment. Right. You can feel the buzz when they're at the mutual windows.
You're living the social part of it.
What's going on, all of it,
You're fulfilling back your childhood comfort of this is the environment of which I was raised.
This might be a good place for us to wrap up then.
Probably is.
Thanks for coming in, Lonny. I appreciate it.
I've enjoyed it.
The Florida Horse Podcast is presented by the Florida Thoroughbred Breeders and Owners Association.